Hello again. Welcome to What's Working. My name is Cam Marston, and my job is to help you understand the workplace, the workforce, and the marketplace trends that are shaping the workplace, the workforce, and the marketplace around you. My goal is to give you insights into things that could change the way you deal with business, deal with customers, deal with employees, whatever it may be. We find the guests that can talk to us about the trends in such a way that we can do something about them, take the ideas and apply them to our own workplace. And with that in mind, I am once again going to promote next week's show, in which we're going to have an author, a corporate consultant, and one of the corporate consultant's clients. The corporate consultant is actually a coach, an executive coach. We'll have him and one of his clients in the studio talking about the book that I'm holding in my hand right now called The Author versus Editor Dilemma: The Leadership Secret to Unlocking Your Team, Your Time, and Your Impact. The author's name is Brandon M. Smith. We've got him lined up to be a part of the Zoom call. The other two will be in the studio with me. And I've heard about this book a number of times over the past weeks, and it's leapt into the front of my attention. And I think, well, maybe that's a sign. Maybe I need to dig deeper into this book. So my goal is to continue to read the book, make notes, make highlights, little sticky notes throughout, and during the show, spend time talking about the value of the book. It's the executive coach and it's the executive that he coaches that have said this book is on my desk all the time. I'm referencing it frequently. So here's my ask of you. Go online. It's available on Amazon, and look for it. Again, The Author versus Editor Dilemma by Brandon Smith. It's a business book. It's got wonderful reviews on it. We're going to discuss it, and I want you to read it, highlight it, and send me your questions for the author. Send me your questions for the executive that's using this, as well as for the executive coach. And let me know what you think about this thing, and let me know what questions you have. And I will pose those questions to my guests next week on the show, and you'll be able to hear the feedback. So we'll have these people again on the show next week. I'm really looking forward to this. It's the first time we're doing it. My hope is that it's a raging success, that everybody that's listening gets involved, and we're able to continue to do these types of book reports on business books that are kind of non-traditional, not exactly mainstream. I've not heard of this book before, but it's had profound effect. They're all the ones that are so popular. This is outside that range. It's done well, but it's not the one that everybody refers to in their business book library. So it'll be interesting for us to dig deeper into this. And in my brief interactions with the author thus far, seems to be a very nice guy. Last time, The Author versus Editor Dilemma. Now, this week's show, I was given the story not long ago about a method of carbon capture that creates a kind of, and the word they used was peanut buttery goo made out of the carbon that's been captured from these emissions, and that goo is then infused, it sounds crazy, but infused into the earth. And there is a company leading the way on this research and on this execution. They're called Tenaska. I had not heard of Tenaska until I began doing my research on this. And from their Wikipedia page, they're quite remarkable. There are only 700 people in the company. Their revenue is $18.4 billion in 2021. They have a big fingerprint. They are repeatedly referenced as one of the nation's largest privately held companies. They are in the gas business, the natural gas business, and a number of other things, which we'll get into after break. But what I want to learn about is the carbon capture, because we had a remarkable show about a year ago about carbon capture in forests and what that business model looked like. Let's take it to the next level and see how they're taking the carbon, creating something out of it, and then infusing it into the earth, if that's even right. We'll be back after this break. You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston.
This is Seth Cherniak, Vice President of Branch Development for the Jeffrey Matthews Financial Group. If you're an experienced financial advisor wanting the freedom of independence but aren't sure making that jump is right for you, we should talk. Jeffrey Matthews has developed a successful program for advisors who don't want to be 1099 contractors and don't want to pay for their own overhead. We're looking for advisors who want the freedom to run their business the way they see fit with the support that comes with a W-2 firm. If you're interested in joining one of our branches, or if you want to open your own branch as a full-time employee, let's chat. Our compensation plan is one of the most competitive among all W-2 firms, big or small. Reach out to us today at jeffreymatthews.com, connect with me, Seth Cherniak, on LinkedIn, or click the link in the podcast.
Jeffrey Matthews Financial Group, member FINRA, SIPC. We're back. You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. Again, thank you so much for joining us on today's show. On the other side of a Zoom call from me right now is Brett Estep. He works for Tenaska. He's today calling in from the Omaha office while we're recording this, but he's based in Birmingham, Alabama. And Brett, first and foremost, thank you so much for your time. Welcome to What's Working.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I want to learn about Tenaska and such a influential, large company, according to Wikipedia, $18.4 billion in revenue, 700 employees, presences all over the place, offices in Dallas, Denver, Philadelphia, Boston, Houston, Calgary, Vancouver, making you international. Tell me a bit about Tenaska and how I haven't heard of this organization.
Yeah, it feels like a large family office to me. And I joined Tenaska about 5 or 6 years ago after about 15 years with the Southern Company. So it's on the other end of the spectrum, a big investor-owned, vertically integrated utility, blue chip, actually one of the best utilities in the country. And I moved to Tenaska, which is also an integrated utility or energy company is a better way to say it, but we're privately held. So based in Omaha, Nebraska, founded about 36 years ago. And we're a diversified energy company. So we have 4 main business areas. We do natural gas trading. So that's physical gas trading. We're the number one physical gas trader in all of North America. It puts us in front of BP and Shell and other names that are, and Macquarie, other names that are very recognizable. So we trade natural gas all over North America. We trade power. So we have the largest third-party independent energy manager in the country. And what that really means is we manage wholesale power assets. So a company owns a wind farm or solar farm or whatever, anywhere in the country, they actually need an entity to take that facility into the marketplace where it's traded. It's different, let's say in Alabama where you're based, we don't have a whole lot of that. But in the better part of the rest of the country, you've got to have this intermediary to take your projects there. So we do scheduling, billing, optimization, trading for these assets all over the country. We're by far the largest third-party energy manager in the country. Then we have our own fleet of power generation assets that we've developed, and we own and operate around 8,000 megawatts of power plants all over the country, natural gas fired, wind and solar. And then we have a development arm, and that's where I'm based. And that development arm builds new projects. So the way I like to talk about us is we're about 800 people, like you said, about 18 billion of top line revenue, about a $4 billion balance sheet. Every year, we're in the top 25 largest privately held companies in the U.S. And it's really a very tight group of excellent folks, mostly based here in Omaha, but like you said, offices in other places, and then a few kind of outliers like myself in Birmingham. But we build, own, operate, manage energy infrastructure projects all over the country.
What is your background, Brett? I suspect you are an engineer. That's my hypothesis.
Well, that would be a good guess. And I think probabilities, that would be certainly a wise thing to do. But I'm not an engineer. I've got kind of an odd path to where I am today. But my academic background is as an endangered species ecologist and evolutionary biologist. So I spent the first part of my career in the federal government with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, with some large consulting firms doing wetland delineations, endangered species surveys, all that kind of stuff. So really on the ground environmental and ecological hard science, and then supporting development projects of all types. So transportation, energy. I actually worked in the ski industry for a while for a firm that designs ski areas all over the world. And the way I think about it is it just gives me this landscape level view of the connection between environment and energy. And that is a hardwired, long-standing connection. And it gives me the ability to kind of think about those projects a little differently, but then also say, hey, look, everything's a series of trade-offs. And how do we mitigate impacts, but still be able to, build energy projects, et cetera?
It surprises me. It seems like a non-traditional background for somebody in your world. It seems, at least in Southwest Alabama, where I'm based, it's often power versus environment down here. There's very seldom a trade-off. It's either one wins or the other loses, and so it's a very non-traditional background, which leads me to this question on this power or this carbon sequestration. We've had people on the show that talk about it in terms of land and trees and how you can these big swaths of pine trees, largely here in Southwest Alabama, are used in that regard. But you're into something new. And according to the press release I'm looking at here, it's a very new technology being funded by the government to say, hey, how do we take this carbon that's a byproduct of a lot of the industrial facilities around here and do something with it? Take me there. Tell me what this is about.
Yeah, so a couple things there. You opened up several good items of discussion. So what you referenced before, which could be pine trees, it could be algae, it could be any number of ways to organically, or what the industry calls nature-based solutions, to CO2 storage. And that's just simply what trees and basically all plants have done for millennia, is take CO2 out of the atmosphere and then turn it into biomass and then produce oxygen as part of that process. So that's one segment of the industry. The other is a bit more of what I would call a traditional sort of industrial approach. I would say that it's not exactly new. It's been around for 40 or so years. It's just that for the most part, carbon capture has been used and then injected into oil fields for what's called enhanced oil recovery. You hear it called EOR a lot of places. So they would capture it, push it in the ground. So if you drill for oil, the oil fields produce, and then the production starts to go down, and then you can inject other things in there to force more oil up. They've been doing that with CO2 for decades.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, what's new is now, and again, the technology is the same. There's no real technological innovation that's necessary to do this. It's very proven, very safe. So the idea is now that we say, hey, we can take it out of the atmosphere either from direct air capture or bioenergy, or from an industrial facility that says, hey, I'm emitting CO2 to the atmosphere and I might just want to just capture it. And then you put it in a geologic formation where it's permanently stored. I mean, permanently. So for geologic time, it's down there, it mineralizes, and it just becomes carbonate rock at that point.
So you get it out of the air. You use the word direct air capture. What I'm guessing that means is you have some sort of filter that's just taking wind and air and breezes and pulling carbon out of it. Is that correct?
That's one version of it. So for Tenaska's business model, we provide what I like to call just the unexciting infrastructure piece of this, which is the storage field itself.
Yeah.
It doesn't look like much from the surface. It looks like a couple little injection wells, maybe 4 or 5, pretty low profile. You're really unnoticeable, lower than the height of a pine tree. And then you inject those deep underground. Let's say in the Mobile area where you are, we have a project in northern Mobile County. We have 11 of these projects around the country, but the one there, it goes down maybe 10,000 feet below the surface into an acceptable rock layer where you've got a cap rock. It's very stable. It stays there. You inject it. So that's the storage part. And you've got to have pipelines to get to that. If you continue, let's say, upstream of that, then you get to the actual emissions itself. And so at that point, it could be an industry with a CO2 emission as a byproduct. Could be power generation, gas processing, petrochem, any number of things where they're emitting CO2, they capture it, and then we pick it up via pipeline, transport it, and store it underground. What I reference direct air capture is a same end game in that it comes to our storage field, but a different front end. And that front end is, instead of the byproduct of an industrial emission, they're actually going into atmospheric CO2 and saying, hey, these historical emissions or the CO2 levels in the atmosphere, then it is a big fan that's pulling it in. It's not a physical or mechanical filter. It's a chemical process where they can actually take that CO2 out of the air, but it's the net effect is the same.
Yeah.
And for us, we don't take a position on why someone wants to do that. We just say, hey, there's a necessary energy infrastructure play here. We know people want it. We have a lot of demand. So our goal is to build the difficult infrastructure, which is what Tenaska has done for 35 years. We want to build that infrastructure and provide that as a service to a variety of industries.
Brett Estep is on the line with me on a Zoom call. His company is Tenaska. We're talking about how they're putting carbon 10,000 feet under the ground, taking it out of the atmosphere. We'll pick this back up after this break. You're listening to What's Working? I'm Cam Marston. Be right back.
This is Bill Estep. I perfected my baking recipe behind my live music stage at my little restaurant in Fairhope, Alabama. We have custom-made smokers and small batch bacon made just for you. So if you're looking for the best bacon in America that has been cured, smoked, and even serenaded by songwriters, you definitely need to try Billy's Small Batch Bacon. www.billiesbacon.com.
Brett Estep is with Tenaska. He's based in Birmingham, Alabama, but today I'm talking to him in Omaha, Nebraska, at Tenaska's headquarters, national headquarters. Large and important organization, and what they're doing, of the many things that they do, what we're talking with Brett about is this carbon capture and sequestration. Brett, to recap what you said, to make sure I understand, Tenaska doesn't capture it. Tenaska deposits it, gets rid of it for the organizations that do capture it. And these could be chemical plants. These could be anything that produce CO2 as a byproduct. They capture it and they get it to you. You guys take care of it. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah, I would say we transport and store it long term. It's kind of a nuanced way, but instead of getting rid of it, just kind of picking at words here, Cam, not to. I think what is super important to us that it's done safely, responsibly, and durably. The whole point here is if an industry wants to lower their carbon footprint or pull this out, how do they do that? Well, they've got to have a trusted provider, a service provider who's got the balance sheet, the expertise, really the skills and ability to do it. So we provide that. Yeah, essentially what you said is 100% correct. We provide the service of, hey, we'll transport it and store it. I think about it as a deep underground permanent warehouse. Yeah,
10,000 feet is a long way down. That's 6 miles underground, and in the right type of rock, I guess, that you're looking for with a hard layer over the top of it, I'm guessing. But how do you get it? I mean, what does it look like? If you were to open up this pipe that's putting it underground and pour some into my hand, what does it look like? What's the consistency?
Yeah, it's what at this point. Well, let's start upstream. I think about it as 4 components. There's the emitter themselves, so that's the industry. That's the ultimate customer for us. So, like you were saying, it could be chemicals, it could be pulp, paper, steel, cement, gas processing, power generation, any of those places that has a CO2 emission, among other emissions. So they install what's called a capture plant. So it's the emitter. The next piece is the capture. And at that point, there's a variety of processes. Some are cryogenic, some are amine-based, which is a chemical-based version, where they take the CO2, and it's any of a number of other things that they're trying to remove out of their process emissions. CO2 is just one of those. And so they pull that out, they capture it and compress it. And so that compression is key. And then it gets transported, and that's where we take it at that point of transportation. And then it's injected deep underground. So that 10,000 feet is about 2 miles, actually.
2 miles. I was thinking of 10,000 kilometers, a 10K. Exactly. That's 2 miles.
Yep. 2,000. So just under 2. And that varies by location. Some places it's less than that. But the point is it's deep, deep, deep below any drinking water or anything like that. That capture piece, when you get it out, it's what's really called a supercritical fluid at that point. So it's kind of in between a gas and a liquid, but it's pressurized. And at that point, what you're trying to do is take something that's, very, very unpressurized and not very dense, very dispersed, like CO2 air. I mean, it's around us right now. We're breathing it out. And you want to compress it and make it efficient to inject and for it to actually bind to the rock itself. And so for it to flow through a pipeline, you want to put it under pressure. And then more importantly, or equally as important, at that point where we pick it up, it's also been cleaned and all the pollutants removed to a certain spec. So when we take the CO2, we want to know, and certainly our permits are going to require us to know exactly what it is we're injecting. So it's very, very stringent regulations to carry it through our pipelines and to inject it. That's all managed by the EPA.
So if I were to get some of this from let's say a tree farm, what is the word I'm looking for? A lumber mill, something like that. I think you said that a moment ago that they would produce these wastes or these CO2 versus a chemical plant. Would they look different, or do you create a uniform product regardless of where they've originated?
Yeah, when it gets in our pipeline, it looks essentially the same. And the reason why is because we want to design our pipe to carry a very pure form of CO2. And certainly when we inject it underground, the terms of our permit, in order for it to be done safely and durably we're talking about, forever, essentially. It's got to be at a spec. So it's a requirement for us that this be this. Now, what you're talking to, I think, is important. That's upstream of us coming to get it.
Right.
Let's say stream of the capture is going to be very different concentrations, different sort of adjacent constituents that might be in there. And that's simply, if you're taking ethanol, so if you're taking corn and turning it into fuel, or if you're taking corn and turning it into ethanol, so that fuel product, you'll get a very pure form of CO2 as part of the chemical process to make the ethanol, very high concentrations. Let's say on the other end of that spectrum, you're a power plant, and you're a gas-fired power plant that's, powers much of the country. We own and operate and develop many of those as well. The concentrations for ethanol of CO2 in that stream might be 60 or 70% CO2. So it's very high concentration. Out of a power plant, it might be 4%, 5%. Very low. And so it's a lot more volume. There's a lot more other stuff in there that has to be removed before we take the CO2. So it's a variety of different upstream sources. But by the time we pick it up and take it, we're very confident. We measure it. There's real-time monitoring of it that we're getting a standard version of supercritical CO2.
Imagine I'm a power plant, and I'm using your services to help me dispose, to store this, to use the correct terminology. Am I paying you on volume for you to come picking it up? Am I paying you on how exactly do you charge for me? How do you charge me to come get it? And is this very heavily determined based on how far you've got to carry it to get to the disposal site?
Yeah, you hit on many of the variables that we look at when we form pricing. So one is, what is the volume? What is the term of the contract? Let's take a big step back. These are like every energy infrastructure project, which is why balance sheet and experience really matters. These are super capital intensive.
Yeah.
So it's very expensive to build the infrastructure. It's very expensive to build the pipelines. And then when you get to the customer, it's expensive for them to build the capture equipment to actually get it. So everyone is shelling out a lot of capital. It's going to last for very long term. So what we look for is, and the variables that sort of go into pricing, how long is the contract? What's the volume of CO2 you're going to send us to store? And then the length of that pipeline, certainly. If you're an emitter that's right near our storage field, that's one thing. If you're 40 miles away, that's a component we put in. The plain vanilla version of our business model for this component of our development, which, we do wind, solar, gas, battery, we do everything. We're very diversified. The plain vanilla version of this one is a take or pay contract. We build our pipeline all the way to the facility.
Okay.
And we pick up a volume of CO2, whether they are on or off or not. We have to fix that contract because we're taking all of this risk on our side to make sure it's done well and safely and durably.
So it's not transported over the road. It's not put in the back of a tanker truck or something like that. It's a pipeline direct from the source.
That's right. I mean, it's possible to do it via rail, via barge, via trucks. But if you're talking about real volume and scale pipelines, you need continuous operation. Back to my point of very capital intensive. these folks are going to want to run those plants to capture that CO2 essentially 24/7. And when you have that sort of capacity factor or operational factor, pipelines is really the only effective way to do that right now.
Tell me what the geology needs to look like for you guys to figure out where to store it.
Yeah, it's a great question, and that's really the limiting factor. And for us as an energy company and an infrastructure company, that was really the starting point. We use 4 criteria anytime we cite a project, and geology is number 1. Number 2 is a viable customer market. So is there demand? 3 is the competitive landscape. How many other folks are there doing what we're doing? Because there are others. And number 4 is a development friendly environment. And just a quick plug for Mobile County in the state of Alabama. I'm an Alabamian too. Alabama is a fantastic place to do business. The state, the county, the city, all the local folks. I think they're just very pragmatic in doing this kind of work. So huge fan. Kind of shout out to Mobile County for that. But for us, the geology. There's two big things you're looking for. You're looking for porosity and permeability. So this rock, if you think about CO2, it's you can't see it as we breathe it out, but it has to be a special type of rock formation that allows you to inject enough in, so it's permeable enough that I can push CO2 through it, but it has enough porosity that it can actually bind it. And then up above that, this is a key piece. There's got to be a cap.
I'm on the line with Brett Estep. He's with Tenaska. We'll be back after this break. You're listening to What's Working.
This is Seth Cherniak, Vice President of Branch Development for the Jeffrey Matthews Financial Group. If you're an experienced financial advisor wanting the freedom of independence but aren't sure making that jump is right for you, we should talk. Jeffrey Matthews has developed a successful program for advisors who don't want to be 1099 contractors and don't want to pay for their own overhead. We're looking for advisors who want the freedom to run their business the way they see fit with the support that comes with a W-2 firm. If you're interested in joining one of our branches, or if you want to open your own branch as a full-time employee, let's chat. Our compensation plan is one of the most competitive among all W-2 firms, big or small. Reach out to us today at jeffreymatthews.com, connect with me, Seth Cherniak, on LinkedIn, or click the link in the podcast.
Jeffrey Matthews Financial Group, member FINRA, SIPC. Brett Estep is on the other side of a Zoom call with me. He's with Tenaska, a very significant company that I only recently learned about. They keep a low profile at $18.5 billion in revenue in 2021. You'd think that we'd all know about them, but I certainly didn't. Brett is today in Omaha. He lives in Birmingham, Alabama, and learning a little bit about this carbon capture stuff. It was brought to my attention by a colleague here in town, and the description that he gave, Brett, is that if you were to put it in your hand, it looks like peanut butter. Now, how he knows that, I have no idea, but it looks like peanut butter, and you inject it 10,000 feet, about 2 miles into the earth. All of these carbon initiatives, Brett, have detractors. All of them have somebody that says, yeah, but. And while your solution that you and I have been discussing here sounds very technologically advanced, and as you've said a number of times, very capitally intensive, somebody thinks there's something wrong with it. Somebody out there is going to chain themselves to a tree and say, this is not what we should be doing. Who are your detractors? Is that something you can talk to me about?
Yeah, for sure. Look, I think I view everything as a series of trade-offs and incentives. And so, whether you're going to capture CO2 and store it underground, there's always trade-offs involved. You can't take anything and say that there's no impact to anyone ever for anything. And I'm not sure you could find me any industry, any process, anything you want to do. It doesn't have to be infrastructure. It could be anything. There's an impact somewhere. You just might be outsourcing that impact overseas or somewhere else. So I end up getting very pragmatic about this. And for us as an energy infrastructure company, what we try to do is say, hey, look, there is a need for this in the marketplace. There are industries. It's not just power or gas or fossil fuels. It's also cement and steel and pharmaceuticals and all sorts of things that people really need. And they don't have a solution to some of their business imperatives. They need this kind of infrastructure to go forward. And having balance sheet, having this kind of expertise, having the stability and really experience that we have is essential in the marketplace to provide that. So I focus less on what the detractors may say, because I do think there are valid points out there all across the board. I also think there's some folks who are just detractors because they just need something to be against, and you're never going to undo those folks. And I instead try to reframe the argument to say, oh, okay, I'm not going to pretend like anything we do is zero impact. Let's talk about what's the best diversified solution to move forward as a country, as an industry, as a citizen of the planet. And then look, we're a business. We're trying to make sure that we provide infrastructure where there are needs. And if I look at the needs, I see people making all kinds of decisions that, particularly in this industry, where again, you mentioned my reference to the capital intensity. These are folks making decades-long decisions on, do I bring my business to Mobile County or Indiana or Texas or any of these number of other states where we have these projects? They want to do it in a way where they have options going forward. And so we provide these very long-dated options on an infrastructure piece. This kind of geology and this kind of stuff, it is where it is, and it's not going to change or go away. So we're providing this as a storage resource for something that's could be decades long of value there.
I know what I'm about to ask is a question. The answers will be a number of variables, but you take a site where you're storing this carbon capture stuff, this product. How long before that site fills up? And I know it depends on volume, et cetera, but when you do your geology, you've got to look and say, I think here's the infrastructure, the geological infrastructure that we're looking for. And it seems like we could use this site for 30 years, for 40 years, something like that.
Yeah, it's a good question. And unfortunately for us, I spend a lot of time doing this at conferences and with various stakeholders internally and externally. The numbers, the metrics, just, you can't even, a buddy told you it was like peanut butter. I mean, that's news to me, but if it's out here at atmospheric pressure, it's just like it is right now. You can't see it, you can't feel it, you can't touch it. I mean, luckily it's non-flammable, non-combustible, non-poisonous, so that's great. But the whole point of that is to say, we don't even really have a great frame of reference on how to talk about this. So here's a couple things to think about. So each of our projects are designed to store 5 million metric tons of CO2 per year for a 30-year time frame. So that's your real question, is how long do these last? Well, we have a design quantity of 5 million a year for 30 years. So that's 150 million metric ton reservoir. And you're like, well, is that a lot or is it a little? I don't know.
Right.
So let's reframe that maybe to what is a typical emitter? How much does a power plant produce? So if you're a combined cycle power plant, let's say one of the ones in your neighborhood there that's along the river, combined cycle, single unit, 2-on-1, maybe 1,000 megawatts or so of output, it might produce 1.5 million metric tons per year. So that would take 5 per year for 30-year lifetime. But here's what I would tell you. That's sort of what we permit through the EPA in phase 1. But I think about these the same way, let's say a Martin Marietta or Vulcan Materials or someone might think about a granite quarry. They have what's their known capacity, and then they have reserves that they might be able to expand and produce for 100 years. We have additional capacity at all of our sites because I am a firm believer that, if you look into a carbon constrained country or world, these assets, and I think of it as an asset class, these assets are going to have value for decades. And that's the way we sort of plan around it.
Where else in the world is this being done right now? The carbon capture and injection?
Yeah, it's being done all over the world. I think the front runners, the U.S. is clearly out in front. And one of the reasons we're out in front is we've provided an economic incentive to do that through federal energy policy, through a tax credit. So that's one of the ways that we shape energy policy policy. In the old carrot and stick model, we use carrots here primarily. In Canada, I would say Canada is a close second, or maybe right there with us. We don't place them. I'll just put a tier of sort of front runners. U.S. is in that group. Canada, in particular, Alberta. So the province of Alberta, the province manages the pore space. They also have a lot of oil and gas industry there.
Yeah.
So there's a vibrant community there. And then also Canada has incentives and taxes on CO2. So they have carrot and stick. The North Sea in Northern Europe, they have good offshore geology. The EU has a lot of, they're stick only over there. So taxes on that. And then Australia. So we're seeing a lot of work on the west side of Australia as well. But if you look around the globe, resources, the Global Carbon Capture and Sequestration Institute, this work is going on globally. And the reality of it is, if you have a CO2 reduction objective, there's only so much you can do via renewables. And you've got to do some of this work as well.
What's next on the horizon? We got 2 minutes left. What is Tenaska working on right now that was going to make me smack my forehead and go, wow?
Well, I think, look, we try to remain very diversified. We try to have a very strong balance sheet. You referenced that. And then we are deliberately private so that we can make very long-term decisions, and we can make decisions that we think are good for customers. Look, we're private. We're held by our own people. We don't have outside money. And so we make these decisions to say, what's the right way to build infrastructure for this country, for our constituents, for our stakeholders? And I think, as we think about how to stay diversified, we just keep a very close eye on saying, hey, gas powered generation, gas trading, power trading, wind, solar, batteries, carbon capture, sequestration, new gas-fired generation, hydrogen. Those are the 6 things that we're into today. But I will tell you, on a daily basis, particularly the teams that I'm on the development side, we're always trying to look around the corner. I would say we're not a R&D or venture capital firm, so we're looking for things that are proven. But we're keeping an eye on what might not be proven today, but what's coming tomorrow.
Brett Estep's company is Tenaska. Brett, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
You're welcome, Cam. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Folks, you can find Tenaska online. You can just Google that name and you'll find more about this company's very interesting stuff. It's going on here in Southwest Alabama, as well as where many of you are listening, right in our own backyard. Maybe not heard about it, but worth checking out. You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston. Thanks again to Brett Estep with Tenaska. I'll be back after this break with segment 5 to tell you what's coming next.
I'm Joey Mason. For 4 years, my goal has been to produce the best farm-to-table products I'd ever eaten. I've done just that at our on-site USDA facility in Grand Bay, Alabama, allowing us to ship directly to your door. This is true farm-to-table. Visit us at masonhillsfarm.com to see all that we have to offer.
Well, that was pretty cool. What I heard in that is here we have a man that is very, very good at his job. You could hear that by the words he was using, how thoroughly he understood every component of the business that we talked to him about. And to my great surprise, as I'm sure you heard on the show, is that he's not an engineer. Here's a guy with a non-engineering degree doing something very innovative and creative. Now, the story came about Tenaska. This show came to my attention when a news release was broadcast here in my part of the world, here in Southwest Alabama, about what they were doing. And I then met with a guy who said, yes, this company, and this is something I should have asked him about, that I should have asked Brett about, said his family owns a piece of land and not far from here where Tenaska has reached out to say, we'd like to pay you to do this disposal. Not this disposal. He was very clear to say that, but the storage of the product. And he said, this is pretty cool stuff, Cam. You need to check it out. So we did. Got him on the phone, took a little while, had to go through people and through websites and stuff like that to learn what it is that they're doing. The point I heard him make is that if you're want to do something about carbon emissions, and this is not a format, this show is not a format for global warming or anything like that. I'm not interested in that. If you want to do something about carbon emissions, then you can do as much as you possibly can do in creating a wind farm and doing an electric battery or whatever it may be. We've had a number of shows on this, but at some point you've got to capture what's being created in carbon and store it. You can't not produce it. It's going to be produced. If you and I want to live in the world that we're living in today, it's going to be produced. How are we going to store it? And it was this past weekend when I was talking to an actual engineer who was talking to me about the fact that all the carbon creates water vapor versus carbon. It's a long, detailed argument of what is creating the warming, if you believe it in that. What is creating the warming? Is it carbon or is it water vapor? Well, water vapor, his story, water vapor increases the temperature, and when the temperature increases, the air holds more water. It's both. Essentially, it's both. Anyway, Tenaska is the company, Tenaska, very innovative stuff, very the employees, as he and I, as Brett and I finished up the call after the recording had stopped, are challenged with being innovative, forward-thinking, creative. Let's come to new ideas for how to deal with the problems that we face. We have the capital to make big investments into solving these ideas. If they're going to work, let's pursue that. Very impressive. All right. Don't forget, author versus editor dilemma is next week. Find the book, buy the book, prepare, send me your questions. We'll talk to Brandon Smith about the book and the lessons that it teaches. My hope is that you'll get involved and we can all learn something from him. That'll wrap us up for this week. Have a good week, everybody. You're listening to What's Working. I'm Cam Marston, and talk to you in a week. As you likely know, this show originates as a radio show broadcast across the state of Alabama, and it continues to grow in both radio listeners and market. After it's formatted for radio, we then turn it into this podcast. Please share it with those you think would find it interesting, and subscribe to the podcast on my YouTube page where you can leave messages and your thoughts and your comments, and I'll certainly get back in touch. Finally, if you're a fan of the show, please offer a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can find my book called What Works on Amazon.com. In it, I highlight the top 10 ideas from the first 200 episodes of the show. Mind you, they're not the top 10 best episodes, they're the top 10 best ideas. Many times the same ideas are brought up again and again by different guests, and we dig into those ideas in such a way that they'll be easily applicable for your business. Simply go to Amazon and enter my name, and you'll find What Works as well as my other books. Chapter titles include How to Find a Niche, Innovation, Building Teams, and so forth. To learn more about the workshops and seminars I offer, go to cammarston.com. There you can view clips of my work, view workshop titles, view my reviews, case studies, customer lists. It's all there. If you'd like a free copy of one of the chapters of my book, enter your email address at the bottom of the homepage at cammarston.com. And from that site, you can email me directly. I always love to hear from you. You'll also find me on social media. Find Cam Marston on all the social media platforms, and you may need to enter the numeral 1. There's one other Cam Marston out there, and that numeral 1 distinguishes me from him from time to time. So if you're unsure if it's me or not, enter that numeral 1 after my name, and it should do the trick. On a more personal and less professional side, I record weekly commentaries that air across Alabama on Alabama Public Radio twice each day on Fridays called Keeping It Real. They've won statewide and national awards. They're simple observations on the world as it goes on around me, and they're only a few minutes long. They're a passion. You can find them on the same podcast app you're using to listen to this. Finally, if you're interested in advertising on this podcast or the radio show, reach out. I've worked hard to cultivate a specific listener, and I can tell you all about them, and I have many different options for helping you reach them. Thanks again for listening. We'll have another episode available soon.